Namaskar and good evening to all. In the webinar series, Education for Life, we have been doing programs every month on a special topic which is related to education as well as life. Today, we have session on National Education Policy 2020, means NEP, popularly known as NEP. And it gives me immense pleasure to, as well as a sense of pride, to welcome Padma Vibhushan, Padma Bhushan, Padma Shree, Dr. Kasturirangan, Chairman Drafting Committee, NEP 2020, former Chairman ISRO. Welcome, Dr. Kasturirangan. In the last 2 years' time, we have been attempting to decode NEP document. Each one has tried to understand the document with their own perspective and experiences. Today, that we are fortunate enough to hear directly from the person who has created this NEP document and his team, of course. And in connection to that, the importance of the NEP is that much that in few days back, Honorable Prime Minister, he conducted a 3 days program named as Akhil Bharatiya Shiksha Samagam, which was on NEP, and Dr. Kasturirangan was also there. So, Dr. Rangan, to begin with the school system, because in our formal education system, the informal system is our home, where we learn many things which may be connecting to skills as well as personality attributes, and then comes to school education. So already the work is in progress related to national curriculum framework, and which is connecting to curriculum and pedagogical reforms. So your take on this particular national curriculum framework, in what way this is going to influence or affect learning process at a school level?
Thank you, Mr. Puneet Sharma.
Sir.
Before I really directly come to the answer to your question, I would like to thank you, Mr. Puneet Sharma of DD National, for organizing this program.
Sir.
To discuss the different aspects of National Education Policy 2022. And thank you also for this. Your questions are very thoughtful and apt for the occasion. So I just went through them just now. Since the different institutions and organizations are just now embarking on implementation, just its own time frame, as you know, there can be many gaps at this stage in respect of clarity on specific approaches, as well as the assessment of the timeline for realization of milestones and goals. There will be early birds, there could be later ones, but the country will progress on this particular program and the policy. Certainly, all efforts are towards moving towards the final goals set out by the policy. Further, the large diversity of the type of institution at both school and higher education level throw up challenges in understanding the best routes for adoption. You know, there are no single path to this. A single shoe doesn't fit this thing, all the legs. So the question is the adoption with attendant resources investments, preparatory work from the academic side. These are all questions. In view of this, my response to different questions that you have made, the 10 of them, and maybe follow-on questions you oppose could be, at times, I would rather try to say what the expectations are and how we are going to move. But I'll try to give a picture which could be a way forward wherever it's feasible. However, it's also gratifying to note that several initiatives of the government related to the implementation of the policy, both for the school and higher education, are already in progress, some of which will be mentioned in my responses. I should particularly use this opportunity to mention the tremendous effort that our Prime Minister, Honorable Sri Modi ji, has put in reviewing the policy, giving the direction, constituting mechanisms, and personally going and giving public outreach lectures, brilliant lectures. In fact, the one that we gave recently at Benares is an example of that. So those lectures have really inspired the nation, ignited the nation with respect to how we want to change the education, transform this country, and really truly make it into a vibrant knowledge society. So I gratefully acknowledge this aspect of the support and the vision that the Prime Minister has laid down in front of the nation, and which is extremely critical to carry this forward on the ground by specific implementation in the shortest possible time. In all this, our Honorable Prime Minister is also assisted by our Honorable Minister for Education, Sri Dharmendra Pradhanji. He has been taking personal interest. He has been taking personal reviews on the various areas of this implementation, setting down deadlines, looking at those deadlines vis-a-vis the progress that we are making, critical ideas, how he has been identifying them, putting priority where it should be there. So these are the kind of things in which he has been deeply involved. I virtually meet him very often, and he takes stock of the whole thing, sitting with many of us. And this is another important aspect of the way we are progressing this. I'm delighted to see today the attendance of vice chancellors, directors, deans, and faculty members, educationists, and students, which according to the organizers constitute today's audience. I'm also happy to note that a valued colleague of mine from the National Curricular Framework Steering Committee, Professor Najma Akhtar, the Vice Chancellor of Jamia Millia Islamia, is also attending this occasion. If she is around, I greet her as a special occasion for me to see her in this forum. The last 34 years have witnessed large changes in the social, political, and economic environment of India, as also the world. As a result, there is increased participation of all groups in political, social, and economic processes, and communication has also grown exponentially. The resulting new global scenario offers both opportunities and challenges for human well-being. The new education policy NEP 2020 reflects these emerging realities and envisages fulfilling the aspirational goals of our nation and the youth in the 21st century. In formulating the policy for school education, I come straight to the answer for your post now. Due recognition has been given to the advances in developmental, cognitive, and educational psychology. This in turn has led to the adoption of the 5+3+3+4 for the school education in place of the current 10+2. This new design for school education structure is better suited to the child's learning trajectory, from perceptual learning to conceptual learning, and then on to prescriptive learning, and finally abstraction. Some of the key features of the school education as envisaged in the NEP 2020 accordingly are integrative and holistic curriculum with equal emphasis on science, social sciences, visual and performing arts, languages, sports, and mathematics. No hard separation or hierarchy of subjects. Integration of vocational and academic stream is another important feature. Emphasis on key concepts, experiential learning, analysis and reflection, values, and life skills. Accordingly, the curriculum and pedagogical approaches should be in line with and responsive to the critical developmental stage of the child, which in turn, as I mentioned earlier, will be guided by the 5+3+3+4 design of 4 stages. More explicitly, at the foundational stage level, you ask this question of how it is going to change the laboratory processes and methodologies. At the foundational level, we have the 4 levels, now 5+3, because I mentioned about it. For children of the ages 3 to 8 and covering 3 years of preschool and grade 1 and 2, flexible multi-layer play-based learning will be the approach. At the preparatory stage for the children of 8 to 11 and covering grade 3 to 5, discovery and activity-based learning, along with some formal interactive classroom learning that could lay the groundwork in reading, writing, learning, physical education, arts, languages, science, social science, and mathematics. In the middle stage, for the children at the age of 11 to 14 and covering the grade 6 to 8, pedagogical curricular style of preparatory stage will be suitably extended with the introduction of some subject teachers for learning and discussion of some of the more abstract concepts in each subject, for which students will be ready at this stage across science, mathematics, social science, arts, and humanities. Lastly, in the secondary stage, for children of 14 to 18 and covering grades 9 to 12, 4 years of multidisciplinary studies with subject depth focused on analytical thinking, attention to life aspirations, and flexibility in choice of subjects for students are to be introduced. It is thus obvious that the school's education is expected to be transformative. You see, there is a big difference between the 10+2 that we had been adopting and the present system that we are now a part of this policy, with attendant large-scale reforms related to curricular and pedagogical frameworks. I would like to add here that we are already in the process of creating this national curricular framework. A mandate document has been created primarily to make sure that we have the same platform in which the thinking happens in the 4 stages of the school education. And most importantly, we are now in the process of also preparing the integrative and the stage-wise definition of what the contents of the curricular framework will be, and the process. So the work is progressing on this particular thing, and this could certainly lead to the next important test of specifying curriculum, pedagogy on the rest of the follow-up activities that would have implications on the classroom. That's how I like to put it in the present context.
Thank you, Dr. Rangan. You have emphasized on transformative education. It has been observed, as well as the results have been, have established this notion that when we learn in local language, the learning becomes permanent. We start thinking on our own language. We are able to perceive the local problems in a much better manner rather than just mugging up. So in your point of view about learning in language, local language, especially at a school level or higher education level, and how it's going to make an impact in a short-term level as well as in a long-term level?
It's an important issue because language as an area in the school policy, in the curriculum, we spent a lot of several weeks we debated the question. And this was not related to 2-language formula or a 3-language formula, this kind of thing. We were looking at language essentially as an element of the expression of an individual, of a society, and its collective continuity in culture. Language in that context has a direct bearing as the mediator in all cognitive and social capacities, including in knowledge acquisition and production. So this is the critical aspect of the language. And there is a special faculty that nature has endowed the youngsters with, and which is then carried forward as you grow older. Children between the ages of 2 and 8 also have an extremely flexible capacity to learn multiple languages. It's a crucial social capacity that must be harnessed in addition to well-established cognitive benefits of multilingualism. It is well established and it is understood now that young children learn and grasp non-trivial concepts most quickly in their home language or mother tongue. So when possible, the medium of instruction, at least until grade I, that's what we have considered, taking into account the development trajectory and the questions of the language and its acquisition. But preferably until 8 will be the home language, mother tongue, or even regional language. The curriculum will encourage a flexible language approach in classroom. Teachers will be encouraged to use bilingual approach in the classroom, including bilingual teaching learning materials. Further, to leverage the enhanced language learning abilities of the young children. This is what I again want to emphasize. All students from preschool and grade 1 onwards will be exposed to 3 or more languages with the aim of developing speaking proficiency and interaction and the ability to recognize the scripts and read basic text in all the 3 languages by the grade 3. The whole idea of a multiple language is not only you enhance your ability to pick up new languages, the areas of the brain which control the language learning process, they are stimulated The process of stimulation, they increase their capacity to assimilate more languages. The very unique thing. So we are no longer talking about one language or a two language or three language policy. There's a criticality that you learn as many languages as possible, invest for the future. Tomorrow you want to study Japanese or Spanish. Certainly you are much better prepared with a multilingual capability than a unilingual capability. This is why I want to emphasize this, because the language is not a controversy. It's a scientific necessity, biological necessity that we have addressed it in the context of the policy. Multilingualism is a necessity for India. That's also I want to say. After all, India is a language country of rich in languages. Or the people used to say the richness of the Sanskrit is combined much more than the combined richness of the Greek and the Latin. So that is a kind of a thing. And they may be considered as a boon and an opportunity for learning and expanding one's horizon rather than a burden. Children learn languages extremely quickly, as I said, when immersed early, and multilingual children in studies around the world have found to learn faster and be placed better later in life than those who are unilingual. It enriches them intellectually and culturally and allows them throughout their life, mind you, you asked this question of long-term impact of this kind of a thing, to think in more than one way. When you talk of two languages or three languages, you also think it little differently. And by being equipped with the structures of expression, vocabulary, idioms, and literature of more than one language. An additional consideration is the learning of science bilingually. I want to say this because students whose medium is instruction is local home language will begin to learn science bilingually in grade 8 or earlier, so that by the end of the grade 10, they can speak about science both in their home language, and if he has been also studying English, he will talk in English. This will enable students to think about scientific concepts in more than one way. Currently, if I have to talk to you and I'm using English, obviously I'm going to stumble on the words for the same thing. We're taking my mother tongue, whether it's Tamil or Malayalam or those kind of a thing. This difficulty we should avoid, because I will be probably much more fluent and expressive to you in Malayalam or Tamil if I had known that I had to learn science through that particular thing. I have this handicap today, but I think the future should not have this handicap. That's the point that I would like to make. Early exposure to multiple languages has a significant impact in enhancing ability of the brain to learn more languages, especially learning for professional use. Tomorrow, if you want to go and be a translator or interpreter, or to translate books in Japanese and Spanish and so on, you need the ability to do that. And this country certainly have to equip itself, especially becoming a world power economically and many other kind of things. So we need to have the ability for foreign languages. And thus, the policy recognizes that a multilingual India is better educated and also better nationally integrated. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for explaining this particular question, because I've been receiving queries from parents and as well as the students, as well as faculty members. In what way teaching in local language will enhance the capabilities? And you have rightly said that this will enhance the expression of any individual. Being multilingual will help any individual being to become a better human being, to have empathy for others. They are able to get connected with others.
This is a good point. Yes.
And learning in local language is not at all a burden. And rightly said, scientifically it is proven that there are several faculties in our brain when we learn like when we are born, we learn sign language. We understand only sign language, right?
That's right.
Sign with the expressions and emotions, and gradually few sounds, and then words, and then sentence framing. So it's a gradual process. So from this platform, I want to assure all the parents that please, remove your all inhibitions, that this step of learning in local language will become a barrier, rather than it will enhance. Or as well, it is well proven in Germany, Korea, China, Russia, they teach everything, even higher education, they teach in their own language. So I congratulate you and your team, sir, for bringing this vital issue in NEP, the necessity of teaching in local language to, to create our youth more employable for the global world.
That's
now, after this multilingual language approach, Multidisciplinary word is, extensively used in NEP. So what is the need of multidisciplinary education for students as well as industries and ultimately for the society?
I think this is one of the important element of our policy. I want to say this, Puneet. The question of how do you want to transform the education, both at school as well as in the higher education side, and the need for the ability to have a broad spectrum knowledge, with of course not sacrificing the speciality that you need, which you to in some cases of education you call it as major, minor, and all that kind of a thing. But to us, it's very clear you need a more foundational capability which is broad-based, and you build your specialized capability on that wide-based capability. That's the central point that we want to say. Why is the question you are asking. The need for multidisciplinary education is the recognition of realizing holistic development of students, even as we undergo rigorous specialization in chosen discipline. In chosen discipline, if we want to get a rigorous specialization, what we say is it is not in lieu of a multidisciplinary wideband knowledge. They go together. Ability to use the specialized knowledge is very much dependent on how broad is your totality of knowledge is. That is the point we have been saying. This in turn, why does it happen? It enables the student to explore the numerous remarkable relationships that exist among science and humanities, mathematics and arts, medicine and physics, and etc. And more generally, and this is what I want to underline, to explore the surprising unity of all fields of human endeavor. So that is the central point about multidisciplinary education. A comprehensive, holistic education develops all capacities of human beings: intellectual, aesthetic, social, physical, emotional, and moral in an integrated manner. Such education develops the fundamental capacities of individuals on all aspects of being human, and thus is aimed at developing good and complete human beings capable of meeting the multiple demands of a society. Major emphasis is thus given in the policy to the aspect of holistic, multidisciplinary education as a foundational component at all levels of education, but particularly in undergraduate education. Liberal education, as it is referred to in the contemporary discussions of undergraduate education, has its origin in India's age-old idea of liberal arts dating back to almost 1400 years ago. In the classical Indian text, if you go back to the education of Banabhata's Kadambari, for example, in the modern day social and economic landscape, the age-old Indian concept is now finding recognition in a new form. The present silo-based approach to undergraduate education must therefore transform into an integrated, multidisciplinary, holistic approach to liberal education. And this is what Banabhatta said, that 64 kalas if you master, then only you become a totally educated man. And those kalas included whether it is science, arts, engineering, carpentry, anything which is in the knowledge space. He said 60, they divided into 64 kalas, and they form the fully educated man. And we are now talking about multidisciplinary education, where we need to do the 64 kala definition may be different in the modern context, but the concept remains the same. There is evidence that certain kinds of outcomes associated with integrative approaches in higher education, including written and oral communication skills, ethical decision-making, critical thinking, and the ability to apply knowledge in real-world settings, are the type of education outcomes that many jobs demand today. Job seekers have been often faced with demands that go beyond deep technical expertise or familiarity with a particular technology. There is a search for well-rounded individuals with holistic education who can take on complex problems and understand the needs, desires, and motivations of others through integration of learning across disciplines. In conclusion, therefore, I would like to say exposure to multidisciplinary ways of thinking is a joy. Actually, if you really look at it, it is not a question of a burden that you learn multidisciplinarity and your learning process is multidisciplinary. It's a joy. Why is it? It is because, particularly for the youngsters, it is strongly associated with their holistic mental development. When their mental development has a certain trajectory, you try to jive that with the kind of multidisciplinary experience you give it to them. It's a very unique experience for them in terms of the joy of learning, joy of understanding, and so on. This is one of the important points. Multidisciplinary education enables you to truly develop both sides of your brain. I'm going to be a little more scientific, both the creative, artistic side and the analytical side. So this is one of the unique ways in which this happens. And no education system should deprive the youngsters of this joy or this opportunity to develop holistically. Apart from being a joy, it is increasingly clear, and I want to say this too important, that the 21st century will demand greater flexibility in ways of thinking. And this can only be done through a greater exposure of diverse way of thinking. So you cannot have unidirectional way of thinking, you need diverse ways. Necessity of fostering a culture of innovation in the, so this is the kind of a thing that I had in mind when your question with respect to the intrinsic quality of an individual, how he will be useful to the society, and how you would like to be useful to the industry. Once you have this all-rounded individuals capable of going into specifics in greater detail with much better equipped to take a view on that, I think that is the kind of people we are looking at the 21st century. And that spreads all across the endeavor that this country wants. So that is how I respond to your question.
Right, sir. God has blessed us with left and right brain, logic as well as emotions, music, drama, literature, several painting. So we have seen that many scientists, including Kalam Sahab, used to play sitar. Many scientists, they make very good paintings. So they're able to manage both the compartments of their brain. So ultimately, which leads to joy of life and joy of living as well. So it sounds, impractical and ridiculous that one person, if a scientist, should not sing song. Why? He's also a human being. He's also having emotions. So I think this is a holistic approach, and this will give a way for many students, those who are good in physics as well as in music. So maybe they are able to understand the wavelengths, vibrations, and they are able to come up with new indigenous equipments which are used in music industry as well. Maybe in the sports industry, somebody is good in sports and physics. So he or she knows that how to use the hockey, the materials used in hockey, the physics behind the forces in any sports, So this will, allow our students to explore in a much better.
Absolutely,
better
right.
Right, sir. So now connecting to this, you have said that diverse way of thinking is needed. So India is a diversified country, and we are having demographic dividend. We are the youth nation, as far as whole world. We are having maximum number of youth in the country. Almost 50 to 60% people are those who are under the bracket of 35 to 40 years of age. So we have several problems, and we need to have our own solutions. So far, we have been naming them as jugaad or unscientific solution. So innovation has given a way to bring them those solutions in a mainstream, and formalizing them in a proper manner to make them as a product and as well as ultimately industry. So your take on the necessity of fostering a culture of innovation in the higher education system and how to proceed.
Yeah. If one looks at the details of the NEP 2020, one of the important things that we have identified is our policy to catalyze and energize research and innovation across the country in all academic disciplines, with a special focus on seeding and growing research at universities and colleges, create a conducive ecosystem for research through competitive peer-reviewed funding, mentoring and facilitation. Research and innovation is central to growing and sustaining a large and vibrant society and economy. I don't have to re-emphasize it here. If India is to become a leader in different aspects of development and truly achieve the potential of its vast talent pool to become a leading knowledge society in the coming years and decades, the nation will require a significant expansion of its research capabilities and output across disciplines. Research has never been more essential than at the present juncture for the economic, intellectual, societal, environmental, and technological health and progress of a nation. A discussion on the broader aspects of higher education and innovativeness of a society will be incomplete without touching upon the crucial area of research, especially when you talk of higher education. India's present lack of high quality research output not only places our country at a serious short-term disadvantage on strategic and economic fronts. You mentioned about our dependence on outside with respect to systems and supports, but it also has a severe long-term disadvantage of becoming quality research is essential for quality education and innovation. So these are related things. While the policy calls for an increase in funding for research, and this has been always the way the scientists were willing to take money from the government, the present strategy in the policy is more, we recognize that it's more crucial to emphasize the revised mechanism for ensuring that these funds are used in a more efficient and accountable way. This mechanism is a National Research Foundation, which we have recommended and which is now within the government consideration, and whose primary role to act as an interface between the government agencies on one hand and academic institutions on the other hand. The National Research Foundation will nurture a vibrant research ecosystem through adequate funding, mentoring, and careful monitoring. NRF will support multidisciplinary research in arts and humanities, social sciences, sciences and mathematics, engineering and technology, including educational technology. NRF can create a unique opportunities to universities which provide education in liberal arts, encompassing social sciences, humanities, and other related subjects. NRF will further promote phased progress of a research activity from pure research to applied research to translational research, leading to the use of final outcomes to spur innovations and economic growth. That is exactly what it is. I want to say this particularly because we spend a lot of time discussing what is going to be our research strategy for the 21st century. 85% of our students go to state universities today. And if you look at the kind of support they receive in terms of research, it is totally disproportionate to the kind of thing we should be giving them for the various aspects of research and innovation related activities. We have recognized this, and the NRF is an outcome of those discussions where the university system, where the 85% of the students are there and whose current research capabilities are very abysmally low, we need to give them. The government has appreciated this and has already considering, I may recall that in the last budget or the budget before, our honorable finance minister set apart 50,000 crores for this kind of a job, especially. So one can see the seriousness with which they have gone about this. The details are being worked out, and I am sure it will be in place in the coming months or a year. But there is no question that the government now sees the importance of research in universities attached to various types of innovations, and those innovations trying to solve local problems, regional problem, national problem, and were capable also global problems. So those kind of a thing certainly is very much. What is the important consideration for stepping up research innovation right now? Social challenges I mentioned that India needs to address today, such as clean water drinking, sanitation, quality education, healthcare. One can read out most of these, which is typical in any statement of this kind. And then you have research in arts and humanities, along with innovations in sciences and social sciences, are extremely important for progress and enlightened nature of the nation. And we need, when you become an economy which is fifth largest economy, and from 10th, we are moving toward that kind of a thing. The nation should be much more enlightened in terms of knowledge bases and the kind of things, heritage that we have. That is a part of the research programs and the knowledge build-up. Recognition that the best teaching and learning process occurs in environments where there is a strong culture of research and knowledge creation, in multidisciplinary settings. So this is the other important reason. Of course, all this will produce capabilities in people, other types of resources that will spur innovation. So NRF was born out of the felt need to increase the quantum and scope of quality research and innovation across all disciplines, and to create a much larger workforce of trained researchers within the country, particularly within the universities, as I mentioned. This will enable India to become more competitive knowledge economy and will fulfill the goal set by our Honorable Prime Minister for an Atmanirbhar Bharat, central to which is being innovative in all spheres of national endeavor. So the strategy I would like to respond to your question is one of strengthening the research ecosystem in the universities, and it will have its own impact on many other elements of the systems which will spur innovations in the country. So this is the kind of a thing that is being envisaged and the government is proceeding with.
So dear friends, those who are quite young and they are willing to make their career in research activities. So there is a way, government is also ready to launch NIRF, and you will find many opportunities to explore yourself in the area of research and innovation. So recently in the Samagam program, Honorable Prime Minister quoted a new term, land to lab and lab to land. So connecting his slogan to the vocational and skill education in India, how can we reimagine this skill education? Since for last 5 years, we have already attempting a lot to brush up and sharpen and propagate skill education, and at least to the last of the country, I mean village education. So how can we reimagine in the light of land to lab and lab to land?
This is in the context of the vocational skill education?
Yes, sir.
Right. So because we have, I mean, one of the thing was, even we need to work on the school education, higher education, vocational education, professional education. These were all part of the national education policy. And many things were working in silos, as you know, the earlier systems of education. And certainly one of the important tasks for us is the modern developments shows the connectivity between the various areas. The importance of vocational education in this the context and skill development have always been recognized in pre-independence India. However, its delivery has always been suboptimal due to the very large part of this lack of adequate investment over many decades, and also several other reasons. Delivery mechanisms also be largely separate from the mainstream education, leading to a divergence between the vocational education and mainstream school and college education, as well as between academia and industry. The complexity and challenge of delivering vocational education and skill development to all age groups, those in school, higher education, as well as those outside, include dropouts and adults, cannot be underestimated. Everybody knows what kind of numbers they represent. Not just due to the many factors of the economy and society that need to be understood and catered to, but also due to the need for academia, industry, and the government to work together. NEP 2020 enables the reimagination of the vocational education, since it moves the focus towards experiential learning. Instead of asking students, what do you know? NEP turns the focus towards asking the question, what can you do with what you know? This shift in perspective is pivotal in the reimagination, namely of bringing vocational education and skill development to the center stage, and building education at all levels around the concept of learning to do while also learning to know, learning to be, and learning to live together. The 4 pillars of the 21st century education. The NEP 2020 outlines all the elements necessary to deliver this reimagination and serving all sections of the society. It brings in experiential learning, connection to everyday life, like with the Prime Minister's statement, fitting between among these, to the society, to the environment, to the arts heritage, culture, etc., from the earliest stages in school. NEP also aims to bring school dropouts back into schools and envisages using school complexes to serve youth and adults, providing them with skills and competencies for life and livelihoods. The Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, MSDE, ecosystem consisting of the ministry and its constituents. The National Skill Development Corporation is training partners and the Sector Skill Council, like the SSEs as you call them, and between them have an enormous amount of know-how. We should know that this is since they have been engaged in skill development since the 11th five-year plan, since 2008. Their know-how includes skills gaps in the industry that need to be filled, the curriculum that needs to be bought in the various sectors of the economy at various levels of proficiency, and the assessment standards for various job roles for the national, so the skill qualification framework that is determined by the sector skills councils. This ecosystem also has access to trainers and funding, to industry partners that can provide apprenticeships and internship, and access to shared infrastructure and collaboration with governments, and the ability to help with student placements. This ecosystem can therefore play a seminal role in helping educational institutions deliver on their mandate of integrating educational education into their offerings as required by the NEP 2020. Instead of individual, there's a higher education institute signing MOUs with, these are some operational details I brought in because they have their own intrinsic complexities. As is happening now, they sign MOU with individual SSTs and so on. It would be better if the National Committee for Integration of Vocational, they have set it up now, recommended by the NEP, we have set it up, it's recommended in CB, in the National Committee for Integration of Vocational Education could then be tasked with the working with all the stakeholders, sharing model curricula developed in conjunction with industry. Widely, this could be then be enhanced by education institutions as per their local needs, assisting with training of trainers, providing career guidance and counseling to students so that they can make the right choices of vocations for themselves as per their interests, aptitude, and aspirations, and providing startup funds for institutions that need to begin integrating vocational education and the mainstream education, skill development, assisting educational institutions with giving students necessary industry exposure and helping their placements. Then the recommendation could be implemented at scales. So this is the kind of thing that we have converted. The important thing is when we wrote the national education policy, the draft version, we had recommended that there should be some more homework we need to do in bringing the vocational skill and education into the mainstream education. And some of those frameworks have to be matched. So the process is on, I understand, substantial progress has been made on that particular thing. Hopefully, we will see that the mainstream education and the skill education, in fact, it is now brought to the same minister. There's a Ministry of Education, minister oversees both skill development as well as the mainstream education. We hope this integration will find a very effective skill development capability in the country. A real reimagining will take place at that. And it is not very far away because I think the rules of the game are fairly well understood now. That's all I can say.
Thank you, sir. Because the need for tomorrow's India is more to create more manpower in the skill sector. Because so far, whatever perception was there, just complete your graduation, prepare yourself for entrance, and then get a job. So that kind of scenario has been changed now. जिसके पास कौशल है वही कुशल होगा. So for that purpose, one need to indulge in skill education as well. So out of several challenges, we have faced challenge of quality and quantity.
Right.
And both at school level, at college level, as well as a university education system. So everyone cannot go to IITs, and it's not possible for government to have great institutions in each and every part of the country. So your opinion on the how to address these challenges of quality and quantity in all three levels of education, school, college, as well as university?
Yeah, this is a question which is a little broad-based because Coming from space department, where I was earlier associated, I have at no time felt that we can ever compromise even a bit about quality and quantity, quality particularly. And it can be it can be very punishing in terms of the success of a space mission. So anything we wanted to do in the space, in the education, and anything, I always had this in my mind. It is not the one element of a quality built into an overall educational program, but a quality which is to be built into every element of the educational program, right from how you start the child into the educational scenario in the early childhood care and education, and moving the child upwards into the higher school education, to the college education, vocational education, professional education. Every element should have that quality stamp. And the quantity, of course, has to be with respect to what the demands and those kind of a thing. But I would more emphasis on the quality, because certainly many times what happens is in the name of quantity, you suddenly flare up a large number of institutions because of this, and the quality is the casualty for that kind of a thing. So, but I would like to say more intrinsic as an element in the education for quality. We have addressed it in terms of how do you, the very concepts that we are trying to develop as an ECC, and where the child's developmental trajectory is the key element to guide what should be taught, how it should be taught. I mentioned about the play-based thing, and then later on, how do you try to bring abstraction? And then from abstraction, how do you bring an education where you try to understand the implications with respect to profession or other areas of interest? These are all the ability of you are developing a judgment ability for the youngster with time, and he understands for that the totality of ecosystem for which he is prepared at the time. And this is the one that we want to make sure. There are two, three important things when it comes to the quality. One is, of course, the intrinsic way in which this is done. That has to be done with incumbent credential, whether it is from the scientific point of view, logical point of view, from psychological point of view, from social point of view. Those are all to be addressed. Second is the central point with regard to the teacher. The teacher plays a central role, and orientation of teachers with respect to how they will try to orient these children, how do they interact with the children, and how do you cultivate a culture for the children, which is what in the broader context makes him a responsible citizen. These are the challenges, and we need to address this part of it with space. The third aspect is an environment, which is a part of at home and the community. That is the third part of it. And the fourth part of it, of course, is the question of how the environment, the local systems are what it is, and so on. So there are many things on which the quality gets embedded without being very obvious. And so this whole scenario of a 15-year education can certainly be functioning to everybody's liking or dislike, for a very simple reason that it is being done with certain level of precision, what I may call it, what that level should be, certain level of what ultimately leads to a quality. It could be related to precision, how accurate you are in your thinking process, and so on. So this is one thing which you have done. In the case of higher education, certainly we have come out with restructuring of the various, we'll talk about that a little later. The restructuring of the regulatory mechanisms is one of the important things to ensure the quality. The governance structure for the university systems. We have, as you know, had three levels of universities: the research universities, the teaching universities, as well as degree giving autonomous colleges. How do you govern them? What kind of thing? And the questions of developmental plans, a 10-year development plan, the 5-year development plan, 1 to 3 year short-term development plan. What are the components of the development? What kind of criteria you put down as something which you have achieved, which you are not achieved, and the transparency with which you try to bring it to the public notice. These are all the elements that finally gets into what you deliver as a quality education. Because if you observe these things and the rules, they are not many. In fact, we have tried to make it, for example, the regulator is light but tight. That is how we put it. So these kind of things are embedded into this. So all I want to say is the original document of 465 pages, every 10 pages, you would have said something on the quality aspect, you would have addressed it. Whether it is related to school education, whether teacher education, whether it is professional education, vocational education, or adult education. and all the recent necessary elements. So to me, it's a holistic requirement. And in a sense, this is the one that will also reflect the country's culture in delivering quality systems, where we have an international competition, we need to. So I always emphasize this fact that ultimately the people who come out of the school education or the college higher education will be not only the champions of knowledge and repository of information, but also they also represent a culture, and the culture of quality and perfection are central to this. And this is being built into the system right from the day one in the school to the last day when you try to leave it and then go into the profession. That is all about that. I'm being a little general on this particular thing because you can take up several instances of this kind of a thing within the policy. But I think it will be too much to describe each one of them in some form or other. But in the overall thing, we have taken care, and your own little satisfaction I have, or many of us have, and including the present government, is the fact that when you ultimately you try to also create the document, the national education policy, which has to have the right quality and right type of response to the public. And we were so happy when it went into the public domain that we found more than 80% agreed with what is there. About the 2 lakh responses that we got, that speaks of what the acceptability is. And the acceptability comes because every person who has read it carefully, and there are many important people who have read it very carefully, they looked for things which should be there or not, and they found it was there. And therefore, they were happy that we have considered everything. So that is the hallmark of the work that we have done. And we think that the policy coming out of that will adequately reflect this concern which you have raised regarding the quality. On the quantity, a better planning and making sure that the optimality of whatever we do is properly done, whether it is in terms of number of schools, the complexes, school complexes, and many other kinds of things which are recommended. The thing I think, but we need a dynamically adaptable system which will respond to the needs of an education at a particular point. And we have not given any specific models on this, but one can certainly build from this policy to a dynamically adapted system which will reconfigure the education depending on the needs and the quantity. And that is well within the modern methods of analysis and simulation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So quality is a state of mind and it starts from self.
Absolutely.
So if you are seeking quality, definitely opportunities are there to avail quality, as well as you have rightly said that you received lakhs of suggestions, and examining each suggestion and finding them appropriate, choosing or rejecting, and then finally getting it summarized in a particular form of document. So extensive work has been done on that part, and rightly said that on every, after a few paragraphs, the quality word is mentioned in NEP.
Yeah.
So to build a culture of quality, I'm connecting to my next question. A culture of equity and inclusive approach is needed in higher education. So far, what is happening that I'm having a particular stream to study, and I'm allowing myself to confine to that particular domain. So in what way we can practice this approach of inclusiveness and equity? If somebody is learning science or mathematics, we treat them that he's a superior person, and somebody is not studying or studying other subjects, it's an easy subject. So that approach of equity and inclusive approach is needed. Then only we are able to, if we see the owner of IBM, he is not a technology man, he's a man of finance. He's running a technology company. So, people, those who are able to build this inclusive approach, they have explored several avenues in the life. So, how to practice this equity and inclusion in higher education system?
Yes, I think we knew even on the day one of our sitting to start worrying about the policy, we had certain priority items on which we thought we should be spending a lot of time in the coming months and year. And quality, equity and quality was one area which we knew, because the public interest and the kind of concern that in this country one expresses about this area is something will come heavily on what we propose as a policy and the type of question that it can raise. So we spent quite a lot of time, not only with the committee itself, but even with the broader consultation process we adopted for this. Now, against this background, I will just say a few things about the question that you raised. First is, of course, the observation that the entry into quality higher education can open a vast array of possibilities that can lift both individuals as well as communities out of cycles of disadvantage. For this reason, making quality higher education opportunities available to all individuals must be among the highest priority. We wrote this right in the earlier part of the introduction itself. Therefore, this policy envisions the, the ensuring equitable access to quality education to all students with special emphasis on socio-economically disadvantaged group, SCDGs, which you call it. The dynamics and also many of the reasons for explosion of SCDGs from the education system are common across school and higher education. We should recognize this. Therefore, the approach to equity and inclusion must be common across school and higher education. And furthermore, there must be continuity across the stages to ensure sustainable reform. Thus, the policy initiatives required to meet the goals of equity and inclusion in higher education must be read in conjunction with those for the higher school education. This is one point that I'd like to bring it to your attention. There are certain facets of exclusion that are particular to and substantially more intense in higher education. These must be addressed specifically and include lack of knowledge of higher education opportunities. This is a very interesting aspect, how much people are ignorant about certain things. Economic opportunity, cost of pursuing higher education, financial constraints, admission processes, geographical and language barriers, poor employability potential for many higher educational programs, and lack of appropriate student support mechanisms. For this purpose, additional actions that are specific to higher education shall be adopted by all government. And these are the kind of things that are being considered now. Some of them are already in the process of this. One is, of course, earmark suitable government funds for the education of SCDGs. As everybody knows that this has been something that has been always asked for increased funding. Set clear targets for higher gross enrollment ratios, GERs, for SCDGs socially. The third element is enhance the gender balance in admissions to HEIS. Fourth, enhance access to establishing more high-quality HEIs in aspirational districts and special education zones containing larger number of socially and economically disadvantaged groups. Then develop and support high-quality HEIs that teach local and Indian languages. Provide more financial assistance is another aspect of it, and scholarships and things like that. And conduct outreach programs on higher education opportunities and scholarship. This is, of course, as I said, the question of the level of knowledge they have about these kind of things is very much below than what they should know. And develop and support technology tools for better participation and learning outcomes. This is another, the technology will be a very special role in this kind of a BT and this thing. Then finally, all the HEAs can specifically look at mitigating the opportunity costs and fees for pursuing higher education. Provide more financial assistance. And I'm bringing some of these which are there straight in the document. I'm not telling this with respect to right now. So, but many of them are now being discussed with respect to how do we want to take it to the ground. Conduct outreach on higher education opportunities and scholarships. Admission process more inclusive, make curriculum more inclusive, increase employability. We are in fact trying to do this kind of a thing even in the presence of curriculum framework work on which a lot of debate is going on. Develop more degree courses taught in Indian languages and bilingually. Ensure all buildings and facilities are wheelchair accessible. There was the question of disability and other kinds of things. Develop bridge courses for students that come from disadvantaged educational groups. Provide socio-emotional and economic support, mentoring of the student through suitable counseling and so on. Ensure sensitization of faculty, counselor, and students on gender identity issue and its inclusion in all aspects of higher education, including curricula. Strictly enforce all non-discrimination, anti-harassment rules, and those are everybody talks about it, develop institutional development plans. I mentioned about it with respect to the university system and the. So the policy, I give a list of this only to tell you that we have given adequate time and energy to identify areas, bring it under the policy. And these are not the kind of suggestions which cannot be done. These are all well within the ability to do for a government. And many of them are also being done by the government. I should also say that. But strengthening those systems, introducing the newer ideas that we have brought in, and having a strict monitoring of how this is moving into the final forward. And these are the kind of thing for which we have the institutional mechanism which has to function properly. So what before I conclude this statement on the equity and inclusion, I would like to say that again, like the quality part of it, we have tried to include it in the school education part of it as a separate chapter. We have tried to include it as a separate chapter in the higher education part. And then also we have mentioned it in other places within the policy. This is just to say, because there have been questions of whether it is included. Somebody have read only one paragraph of that and said that that is all that is about. But it is an all-pervading discussion across the different pages of a policy book, which is fairly voluminous. And so that gives assurance that there is enough scope, there is enough amount of effort that is being now considered. And I am sure that the necessary resources will be allocated for there where there is more urgent need to further improve the system. But it is a very key element of this government's policy. They have adopted this policy. So it is a key element of the government's policy. That's what my understanding is.
So bridging is needed to have a better access for education for the deprived section, for the people, those who are unable to, get the quality education. So already some bridging have started in the area of technological uses. The shift is there from conventional learning to blended teaching learning with the help of technology aided softwares and gadgets and tools. So your opinion on this particular part, that whether this role of technology will ease out the process of learning, or the conventional method is still a better way to learn?
There's a good thing, because I think technology is now coming into the forefront, as you rightly said, is growing up, and it is also getting into several endeavors. And particularly in the education, if you see the variety of ideas that are coming thrown up with respect to the use of technology, certainly it's amazing, and it has got a tremendous implication. Yeah, if we move the educational activity further. But one thing that I would like to start with, when we talk of a balanced approach to blending technology, which is what your question is very focused on, that particular thing, and the teaching learning into the teaching learning process, there are, at least I would like to restrict the discussion to two key questions to keep in mind. First, there is a technology targeting in the teaching learning process. For whom are we doing it? That's the first question one can ask. If it is it only for teacher? Is it only for students? Or is it for both? If the target includes students, we must ask the stages. Or what are we talking about? Is it foundational, preparatory, middle, secondary, or higher education? Having a clear understanding of the target group is important, because the evidence for technology's positive impact is strongest for users at the mature end of the spectrum and weakest for the younger users. Thus, if we are talking of teaching learning at the foundational stage, then technology that helps a teacher or a parent be more effective at helping and guiding students may be acceptable. However, any technology that directly targets youngsters should be rigorously evaluated before it is adopted, because it has got multiple dimensions of implication on the behavioral and other aspects of ecological aspects of a youngster. This is precisely why the national education policy, I want to bring this up, because the very important recommendation recognizing this aspect we have made, and that is to establish a National Education Technology Forum, NETF. As the name suggests, it's a forum in which EdTech innovators, researchers, and other stakeholders can exchange ideas and establish best practices for the most effective use of technology in the teaching learning process. until there is a consensus on these best practices. My message to teachers and parents of young children is to be extremely careful about the technologies and to generally err on the side of the conventional teaching learning process. For more mature and self-aware learners, the balance can and must shift towards use of technology to aid their learning. For instance, both UGC and AICTE have correctly argued for blended learning at the undergraduate level and beyond, and have come out with concrete implementation model. They're already there. The second key question is to keep in mind is which aspect of the teaching learning process is being targeted by the technology. Several decades ago, I just want to record my own experience, a little bit of it, which is not very much a thing. When I was involved in conceptualizing and evaluating ISRO's EduSat program, our initial emphasis was on using satellite technology to target only content delivery aspect for the teaching learning process. We wanted the best content to be delivered instantly to the most remote learners in the country. Right from our early experiments, it became evident that learners wanted more. They wanted to ask questions, to interact with the teacher. After all, interacting with a knowledgeable and sensitive teacher can help students explore the limits of their understanding and take the next step. So we realized that a one-way communication is not adequate. It has to be a two-way communication, interactive. So we started changing the space systems configuration to enable the necessary bandwidth for two-way communications and so on. That's an interesting story to see how things evolve the moment you put a system into place. Today, technology can blend into this aspect of teaching learning. For instance, the best institutions make extensive use of technologies for conducting formative assessment and providing actionable feedback to students. As you know, NEP emphasizes formative assessment, which is assessment for learning, over summative assessment, which is assessment of learning. The actionable feedback that technology can provide includes pointing learners towards high quality content that addresses specific gaps in their learning. We must also plan for rapid advances in technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing. To this end, the government of India is investing heavily in the National Digital Education Architecture, you know, the NDA part of set of open digital public goods, on top of which innovators can build diverse, blended solutions for teaching learning. So this is the kind of a thing in the technology. I think technology has a great future. There is also a need for a lot of research and exchange of ideas. The National Technology, Educational Technology Forum, even though it is a kind of a discussion forum, a kind of a consultative forum, I think is an important mechanism to evaluate in the country's context, the social context and other cultural context, how well are this use of technology, especially at the lower ages of the children, when how well this can blend into that. But the blending process of learning has a great future, the technology of blended learning. And certainly the evaluation of the whatever experiments have been done in this country has been highly satisfactory. So I think that is where it stands so far as my opinion on this technology and the blended learning is concerned.
No, thank you, sir, for the clarity. Definitely, this is going to enhance the process of learning and ease out the burden on the teacher to help the students to learn in a better way. So NEP is still a buzzword for many faculty members. How can it's a big challenge. We are already having shortage of qualified faculty members in the education institutions. So how can we train the trainers for NEP?
This is a very, since the time when the NEP policy started seeing some finality, and even before it is put to the public domain or as another thing, the Prime Minister and the education ministers, that Prime Minister especially started going through and understand what is the policy and how it is being crafted, what kind of responses the country has given, what kind of things or on the pragmatism side, how we are recommended. And one of the key elements of this outcome was, once the policy was accepted, he has become a big champion of this entire thing. And he now propagates this policy across the length and breadth of the country with highly inspirational talks, but well blended with critical elements of the policy, which is extremely important for the youth of the country to know and therefore try to recognize its criticality. And that is one aspect of, so he has been a kind of an ambassador at this stage for us to make sure that the country realizes the potential of this policy and how India as a nation in the next coming years will certainly he wants this country to be a vibrant knowledge society, a dynamic knowledge society. And that is what he is saying this policy will provide for. We have also a very equally dynamic education minister who has been also pushing this thing. And he has, as I told you in the very beginning, he has been going into the nitty-gritty detail of every kind of things that we are recommending or discussing, and good decisions and sound decisions based on sound principles and also aligned with the policies, letter and spirit is the order of the day today with respect to that. So these figures, I would like to put the rest of the thing you said, because how trainers, what I see, the trainers of NDP are the people who are at the higher levels, could be the leaders, educational leaders, the vice chancellors, directors, and many others who has to plan, execute this kind of a thing in the individual institution or collectively. So this system that is now moving in the last 1 year or so, I have been seeing this and experiencing it in most of the things. I will first say there's at the political side, of course, I studied about Prime Minister and the Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhanji, but you can see President himself called a governors conference and he had a national debate on the national education policy. He spent the whole day sitting through the whole conference. Just you can see at that particular point. Prime Minister had called the meeting of the chancellors and senior education center and state both and HEI. He made several meetings of that kind. I myself attended several of these, so I know how seriously this was being. And everywhere the concerned vice chancellors and the state level functionaries going back and reworking on that and saying that how we are going to now align myself with the discussion that came out of it. This is on the professional side. The country's outreach program by many of the policy members, related participants in policy formulation, UGC officials, including chairman, AICT and chairman, secretary at the school level, Srimati Anida Meda Karwal, she has been very dynamic in trying to take up this and moving forward, and NCRT official. They were all extraordinary individuals who are now pushing with passion this thing by holding workshops, discussion sessions, and things like that to understand the NEP, to translate NEP into and we diffuse it into the existing system, and finally how you make a transition plan, we want to call it that way. So this is the other part of it that is going on. Then there was a recent thing, if you would have known, of course, this is the Chief Secretary's conference at Dharmashala. It was again attended by Prime Minister himself and all the other members, including Minister of Education. But the importance again, there's a focus on NEP, school, teacher, and child. 3 areas were discussed threadbare in the operational sense, not on philosophical sense. So there is another kind. I read through those documents. That's why I can say this. And more recently, of course, there was also another conference, which was held of education ministers conference at Ahmedabad, where education ministers of all the states came. Prime Minister again inaugurated this. Dharmendra Pradhanji presided over many of this thing. And there was a tremendous enthusiasm among all the education ministers of different states and trying to say how they are moving ahead with respect to the school education, what kind of transformatory steps we have taken, what are their plans and things of that kind. So that means there is a lot of discussions going on. And this also becomes a forum to exchange notes about the individual experiences vis-a-vis one or the other. This is another example. I'm telling another example. there was, of course, now most recently, and you mentioned about it, the conclave of vice chancellors at the top at the Varanasi. Another extremely important meeting because it is the first of its kind that level of high officials came, discussed and debated, and it was not just a general kind of a thing. There were themes, and I want to say this because I remember that they included multidisciplinary and holistic education and NEP, research, innovation, and entrepreneurship, governance and capacity building of teachers for quality education, quality ranking and accreditation, digital empowerment and online education, equitable and inclusive education, promotion of Indian languages and Indian knowledge systems, and success stories and bread practices. You can see the breadth of coverage of the NEP related items by the vice chancellors at one location at the Banaras conclave. So this is the kind of exchange discussions that are going on, exchange of ideas that are going on, and these are always parallelly backed with actual success stories. So you already know on the ground also how much of this has happened, what is the experience. So this kind of a thing, and I also, some time back, I saw that one of the university was preparing an entire host of a nice video about the NEP with the essential contents. And what are the ideas of how do we translate this? A very innovative way in which you can teach people who otherwise are a little less informed and see how you can use that particular video to understand the mechanisms of translating NEP by understanding NEP. The NEP understanding itself is very well addressed with respect to those videos. So there's another kind of a thing. All I want to say with respect to all this is that there is a general awakening with respect to how to quickly move towards the final goals of the NEP 2020. As I said in the very beginning, the country is complex, level of developments are different, the quality of work that you can do will be limited by the type of people and the resources that they have. But what is very encouraging is at the highest level, we are getting the full support. At the level of implementation, everybody is enthusiastic. And at the grassroots level, there is an impatience to make sure that this is transformed very quickly. In fact, some of the younger school children who have come to me and said that, they were on the transition from the school education to college education. In the process, they will miss the new education policy, school education. They want to go back into school education to see whether they can experience the new school education policy. That is the children's perspective of this policy. So on the whole, I want to tell you, it's a very encouraging situation. Ecosystem is extremely conducive, and I'm sure that this will spur a new era for this country as a part of an overall ambitious development that the Prime Minister and he has already said what it would mean to be an India for 2047. And I am sure by that time, this area of activity, which has been now nurtured by all these great leaders and thought leaders, certainly will find its most rightful place in the overall context of this country's priorities and its name and pride with respect to how the global community will look like. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So the environment is conducive, and obviously the role of a regulator is also changing. So before moving to my last question, I would like to mention here that the platform where we are talking, having this session, Deetya, that is there in the backside backdrop of the logo. Okay. They have developed a platform which enables digital transformation at education institution. Enables respective stakeholders, student, faculty, administrators to focus on their role and take informed decisions. So this is in alignment to NDR, which is the prerogative of Government of India. So now coming to since the environment is conducive, right from top to bottom, people are keen to implement NEP. So in what way the role of regulator in higher education system is being transformed?
We also, when we took over, when we started discussing the question of a policy, the question of education, regulatory system in higher education was one of the things that many people flagged as something which we should not only discuss, but review thoroughly. we understood that the regulatory system needs a complete overhaul because of the way in which it has been functioning, and certain things were not anticipated, but then it happens. That is kind of a thing. And the overhauling in order to we are energizing higher education sector itself. We have said how to restructure universities, how to bring in research, how do you to create liberal education. So there is a whole host of things that's going to happen. So if you don't have the right regulatory system to facilitate this kind of a growth of new areas and new transformatory system, then obviously we will be left with difficulties in seeing the right type of achievement that we are looking for. So in order to see how to correct this, the regulatory system of higher education will ensure that the distinct, what we decided that the distinct function, everybody knows what it is, so I'm not going to go into the details of it, but distinct functions of regulation, accreditation, funding, and academic standard setting will be performed by distinct, independent, empowered bodies. And it is expected to create checks and balances in the system, minimize conflicts of interest. This is one of the critical things that was agitating our mind. We have to minimize the conflict of interest and eliminate concentrations of power. The 4 institutional structures will work independently and yet at the same time in synergy towards common goals. These 4 structures will be set up as 4 independent verticals within one umbrella institution, the Higher Educational Commission of India, HECI. The first vertical of HECI will be the National Higher Education Regulatory Council, be the NHERC. It will function as a single point regulator for the higher education sector, but as of now, excluding medical and legal education. It will be set up to regulate in a light but tight manner, focusing on few matters like financial probity, good governance, and full online and offline self-disclosure of finances, audits, this kind of things but they are all light but tight. That is the definition is elaborated. The second vertical of HECA will be a meta-accrediting body, the National Accreditation Council, will be a primary mechanism for regulation through accreditation. That is the relationship between regulation and accreditation. The third vertical of HECA will be the Higher Education Grants Council, responsible something like the present UGC, but much more enhanced in terms of the powers for granting, and responsible funding and financing of higher education based on transparent criteria. HEGSC will be responsible for disbursement of scholarship, development funds, launching new focus areas. All those kind of things will be under this HEGSC. The fourth vertical will be the General Education Council, the GEC, which will frame expected learning outcomes for higher education program, also referred to as graduate attributes. A National Higher Education Qualification Framework, NHEFQ, will be formulated by the GEC, the General Education Council, and will be in sync with the National Skills Qualification Framework. We talked about it in the early part of the program, the NSQF, to ease the integration of the vocational education into higher education. The professional councils like ICAR, Veterinary Council of India, National Council of Teachers Associate Education, Council of Architecture, National Council of Vocational Education and Training will act as professional standard setting bodies, PSSBs, which will play a key role in the higher education system and will be invited to be the members of the General Education Council. Coming to effective governance and leadership, the policy recognizes that effective governance and leadership is the key for the creation. I want to say before that, HECI is certainly an important transformatory change that the policy is considering. And the policy has laid out and government is considering. Coming to effective governance and leadership, the policy recognizes that effective governance and leadership is the key for creation of a culture of excellence and innovation in HEIs. In the next 15 years, through a system of graded accreditation and graded autonomy, all HEIs will aim to become independent, self-governing institutions pursuing excellence. There are many institutions in this country which have this arrangement, but many of them are not. So that is where we are in this recommendation. With appropriate graded accreditation, such as institution will establish a board of governors, consisting of highly qualified and competent individuals. These are all models which are already here. The Board of Governors will be empowered to govern the institution free of any external interferences, make all appointments, including that of the head of the institution, take all decisions regarding governance and so on. So there's a high level of autonomy with respect to administrative, financial, and academic. It is envisaged that they will be incentivized and supported and mentored during the process of the institution, and will be such an empowered BOG. The most important thing we want to say is an empowered BOG by 2035. Most of the higher education will make the major transition. And it will develop. And the other important thing is because we need also a method of making sure that it is going according to a certain plan and goals. So BOG will develop a strategic institutional development plan, IDP as you call it, long term, 10 to 15 years, medium term, 5 years, and short term, 1 to 3 years, based on which institution can develop educational research outcomes, parameters for quality and capacity, improve organizational, financial, and human resources development plan to assess the progress. So that is the kind of a thing that we are enjoy the thing. So we think the regulatory structure, the institutional modification will create the governance of higher educational institutions, and the overall system of the HECA concepts and the National Higher Education Curricular Framework together will bring in the necessary discipline into the functioning of the system without causing any kind of the conflict of interest, which could vitiate the atmosphere regarding the management of the higher education system. We have taken adequate prayer by this kind of a recommendation, and government is very serious about how best to put it on the, because these are all at the highest level, you make those changes. So you need to do quite a lot of thinking about every aspect of what is implication. So it's rightly going at the speed in which it can go, but I am sure it will be a transformatory step that the government will undertake. Thank you.
Indeed, in just 2 years' time, from document to each vice chancellor, each institution, policy makers, including Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister, has reached. And I'm sure in the coming 1 year's time, the takeoff will be in a much better form. So just quick questions, if you kindly allow. Already it is 6:29. If you wish to attempt 1 or 2 questions from audiences.
I don't mind. As I told you right in the beginning, on the implementation side, my complete familiarity, because these are all still in the process and also highly varied at different points and time. So there cannot be one unambiguous answer to those kind of a thing. If you understand that premise, then I will try to see what my perception is.
But during this last 1.5 hours, we have covered each and every aspect of NEP, and especially the thought behind developing those documents and policies. So there is a question. NEP 2020 has a provision of credit banks. If somebody is completing credits from different institutions and accumulating credits, then who shall be providing the degree? Whether the concept of requirement of migration TC be done away with for enrollment, as well as we are becoming more liberal in permitting dual degree simultaneously.
The order regarding how an ABC system will work and how it will allow migration of youngsters, which will facilitate where you want to study, what you want to study, at what time you want to study, and at what time you want to leave the study, and when you have to get back to the study. And you don't waste anything you put as an effort for studying in the form of credits which are already credited to your account of educational asset, is something which is what it envisages. But as you know, the present system has got a variety of institutions. You have got at the higher ranks like Institute of Science and IITs and things of that kind, ISRO and so on. You have the central universities, you have the state universities, and there are many autonomous colleges and things of that kind. And they all together run into more than 40,000 kind of a thing. And so to have an unambiguous model with respect to how do you make those kind of thing will depends on academic equivalence, the standards set and so on. Parallelly, some of those activities are also in the progress. So currently, if you ask me about where it stands, it is yet to mature into an operational system, number one. There are discussions between like institutions, whether at least between them, one can do this. IITs, there are so many IITs now, you can, if you want to make a change, does it allow? This is one possibility. Or do you have between IIT can an agreement with a very good institution locally where they could do this? Some of these things are being explored. And the operationally to set kind of a thing, there is no significant thing that has happened which can be reported. But as a concept, it is accepted. Academics are willing to discuss this question with regard to the movement and the flexibility of migration between different institutions, and also the flexibility for them to undertake studies of what they want at what time they want, provided you will fulfill certain basic criteria of entry and so on. That is an absolute must. You cannot just enter from one institute and another. There are also the questions of whether you will be nurtured with a lower level institution and then you try to do something and go to the higher level institution. The economics of this kind of a thing for running this. There are many, many such dimensions. All I can say at this stage is the concept is accepted. How will you translate it into the ground, and where there's a significant number which I can use to exemplify what is our policy on that particular thing. At this stage, we are not ready to do that. That's all I can say of this. But certainly the work is in progress. It's, many institutions are working together, discussing together, and trying to see. And your government is also helping them. In fact, ABC, some of the things on with the UGC has an order that is all there. But I think still when I say that certain things are moving, means there is a visible way in which I can give you an examples. That part of it at this particular stage will be premature for me to do that.
Thank you, sir. Just last one question. This is from audiences. We are sorry for the, we have having at least 50, 60 questions, but due to time constraints, we won't be able to take up. Still, in the live session, many people are sending the queries. I regret. This last question. Is there a implementation roadmap for NEP for private universities who either does not have resources or do not put finances for a change in the system?
One of the premise in which we want to build this policy is not to show too much of distinction in terms of basic regulation or other kinds of things between private and public institutions. They both have to meet certain criteria. I said about the 4 elements of the regulatory thing, the HECI. If you lay down those things on the regulatory and accreditation, it should not be different. This is one of the important things. So they, on one side, they come to enjoy, if they want to call it they enjoy the same status as the government aided institution regarding this kind of thing. The second aspect is areas like National Research Foundation. We have not made a distinction in terms of funding under the National Research Foundation, where you say only government-aided institution will get the benefit of funding for research and not the private. That also is not there. Then the third aspect is with respect to the kind of assets with them be running short. For example, all the private institutions may not have many facilities, a good playground or some other kind of a thing. Some of these facilities which the public institutions possess, they can be shared under an agreement. There is no problem of public assets being shared by the private institution for this thing. And lastly, many other kinds of facilities, it will be worked out in a more greater detail, will facilitate the not so, the kind of, what it says is resources do not have the finances to change the system. Actually, one has to see that the changing the system doesn't mean, there are timelines that are there like 2035, 2040. The question is, what do you want to have a direction, and how do you want to build it up, and how do you, where priorities has to be laid? I think there may be some basic requirements. And if these kind of institution can address those basic requirements, I think many elements of the policy which currently are exclusive to the governmental system, some of which we have identified explicitly as being applicable also for the private, could be also reconsidered in terms of even widening the scope of that kind of a thing. But it all depends on, because the general statement of this may be very difficult to respond to, because it all depends on what type of institution it is. And, the basic premise in which you run a higher education institution is that you have the minimal requirements to run it. If you start with the premise that you don't have the requirement, then the government will not be a party to build up the total capability. That obviously public money cannot be used. But public money can certainly be used to help them to improve the system. So the choice is between whether you want to improve the system, you want to add a few things, and you want to get the support of certain things, or whether you want to build the system itself with public this thing. This is a question which I don't want to get into at this stage, but I personally feel it may be more difficult if it is a question of building up an institute from one state of level of performance and capability to another state of performance and capability. But there are ways in which the new education policy can be adopted even by not so well endowed universities, provided they are very discreetly make choices of the way they want to run the institute or university and the scope they want to have. I certainly cannot today invest something for a small college and then say that in the next 10 years, I want to build a Stanford around it. It just is not the kind of thing that may work out. But certainly there is enough understanding and a sympathetic way to respond to it in the policy on areas where the sharing of resources is possible. And the sharing of resources is something which can be imaginatively done. And I think that should be explored.
So there is no discrimination. Whether it is a public university or a private university, everyone is to offer quality education.
Absolutely.
For the society broadly. So thank you, Professor Dr. Rangan. It was really an enlightening session, and many queries were there which were unanswered so far, especially related to language, use of local language in the school education as well as in higher education. And multidisciplinary approach was really, you rightly said that diverse way of thinking is needed for tomorrow's era. So gone are the days when, you were specialized in one particular area, and, it's time for something like, jack of all and master of five.
That's true.
So that's how you will be more useful for society as well as self. So thank you, sir, once again. And for the next month, we will be having on 20th of August, another session, which will be on physical, digital, and physical.
Oh, great.
And with the note that wish you very good health, and we wish that you will continue to bless and enlighten everybody whosoever is there in the education system in the country. And I'm sure with your vision, India will lead, in the coming years, be in terms of employment, employability, because all these issues are connected to basically education system. Thank you once again, Dr. Rangan.
Thank you, Puneet. All the best to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.